Hello, Rivals fans, and welcome back to the Rivals Report, the show that gets you up to speed on Rivals Esports news in a nice, bite-sized package. My name is Diatonic, and this is the Rivals Report number 46 for the week of April 27th, 2026, powered by Autofull. Be your own hero. On this week's report, the INGAGE preseason marches on as Asia wraps up playoffs and Oceania teams hit the battlefield for the first time this year. We've got all the headlines you need to get caught up. Plus, we're revisiting Aramori's Game Changers Cup as the event drew to a close over the weekend. We've got to look at how the rest of the event went, as well as who walked away as champions. And INGAGE's Grassroots League returns for a second week of action, and we've got highlights. Well, the first tournament of the INGAGE season is nearly complete, with Asia wrapping up over the weekend and Oceania teams playing out their preseason group stage. There's been drama across every single region of INGAGE in this preseason, and Pacific wasn't immune from this either. There were banger matches, surprise upsets, and comebacks, and yet another preseason champion being crowned in Asia. Here's what went down. All eyes were on Asia partner team Reject coming into these playoffs. The team is packed full of veterans, and expectations of them were high coming into 2026. But as you may have seen on the previous Rivals report, the team had a less than desirable start to their group stage. They struggled in week 1, taking a not too surprising loss against powerhouse team Pirates, but this sent them on a spiral, losing to both MRC qualifiers AAAD and guest team Zero Tenacity later in the week. There was a cloud of doubt hanging over this team, although their week 2 performance improved greatly. They'd make it into playoffs with a 4-3 record, and it seemed like many thought they didn't stand a chance. But in the bracket, they came out swinging against XOXO01, taking a solid 3-0 win and working to dispel some of the doubt they'd picked up in the group stage. But their next match against Zero Tenacity was the real test. They'd been swept by Z10 back in the group stage, so we needed to see something big here. It wouldn't be unscathed, as Reject would drop Museum of Contemplation in a nail-biter finish, but Zero Tenacity would be stunnered and dropped to lower bracket, with Reject taking the win 3-1. And though they were to be commended for that win, most didn't think they could handle their next matchup, the upper bracket finals against the number 1 seed Pirates. But against all odds, Reject would yet again overcome a team that had their number in the group stage, and Reject would be the first team to qualify for the grand finals, exercising their demons in both Zero Tenacity and Pirates. Reject had spilled blood in the water by sending those two powerhouses down so early. Zero Tenacity had some distance to cover in that lower bracket, but they'd carve a path of destruction through both rival Esports and XOXO01, eliminating both in unceremonious 3-0 fashion. That would put them on a collision course with Pirates in the lower bracket finals, a matchup many thought they'd be seeing in the grand finals. But it was do or die for both teams, both hungry for a rematch and an opportunity to return fire against Reject. Z10 would start off on the right foot, trouncing Pirates on Celestial Husk, especially surprising since domination is usually Pirates' strong suit. They'd win another on Spider Islands and get to match point almost immediately, leaving Pirates caught on the back foot more than we'd seen them throughout this entire preseason. But they'd rally back, trying to level out the series as they'd take Midtown and Museum of Contemplation for themselves. It'd all come down to Hell's Heaven, another domination showdown, and Z10 would dig deep. Though they'd lost some momentum, they'd push on through and yet again take an uncontested domination map for the 3-2 win. And that win over the number 1 seed in Asia would propel them into the grand finals, where they'd come face to face yet again with Reject. But if you thought Reject were scary throughout their upper bracket run, you hadn't seen anything yet. In fact, they were completely unrecognizable in the grand finals. They would go on to perform what is essentially one of the strongest shutouts we've seen in competitive rivals thus far. 2-0 on Celestial Husk, 2-0 on Museum of Contemplation, 3-0 on Central Park, 2-0 on Hell's Heaven. Around every corner, at every turn, in every instance, Reject had Zero Tenacity's number. And what a comeback story for this team, a true redemption arc. Many of us, myself included, had basically written Reject off after that week 1 performance. And in the face of the criticism, in the face of surmounting doubt, they would live up to their organization's mantra. They would reject everything but victory, and against the odds, emerge as champions of the Asia preseason and in unquestionably dominant fashion. And we finally got to see Oceania in action for the first time this season as they played out a truncated group stage over the course of the weekend. MRC qualifiers, the Chiefs went on an absolute tear throughout the group stage, taking no prisoners and clocking a solid 3-0 finish, no maps dropped, and landing in the number 1 seed spot in Group A. Fury, Baxium Japan, and Vulcan Red would all feel their might as they're looking to build themselves into a credible threat against well-known teams like Gen G. And speaking of Gen G, we finally got to see the team known as Chopper Mag in action over the weekend, and it was all business for them. They'd also go undefeated and unscathed here, giving up scant few objectives to any of their opponents in DXA, Kanga, and JFT. But the Oceania story doesn't end there. In fact, the group stage as of this moment is technically unsolved, as we had a developing situation unfold as a result of the final match on Sunday. DXA and Kanga Esports would go to war in that final series, trading blows and taking the match all the way to map 3 and all the way to extra rounds on Central Park. DXA would build up a massive time bank that they'd come to rely on, and it would help them overcome Kanga's final defensive efforts to snag the series win. But this win created an absolute mess in the math behind determining which team would advance to the playoffs. With that 2-1 victory, that would give Kanga, DXA, and JFT the exact same record in overall series wins. And in looking at the map scores to try and break the tie, we'd discovered that they were all exactly the same at 3 and 5. Who was qualifying to the group stage alongside Gen G? We unfortunately wouldn't get the answer on that night. But a tiebreaker showdown has been scheduled for this Friday, though it seems like it won't be officially broadcast. And to go back one extra week to complete our Ignite coverage, the China region is also kicking off their playoffs later this week after a heated group stage. The reigning regional champs OUG were back on top once again, clearing groups with a 7-0 record and re-establishing their place at the top. But fledgling squad Fiat Lux weren't far behind, claiming the second seed and wrapping up their group stage with a solid 5-2 overall record. Those two teams would earn a bye for their high placements, while the other 4 teams will first battle each other in the upper bracket quarterfinals. SLZZ and Iconics also clocked 5-2 records, but lost out on the bye due to the map differential tiebreakers. Not Bad and Team Rise would snag the last 2 playoff slots at 2 and 5, putting them in the crosshairs of SLZZ and Iconics in those opening matches. AIM Miracle X just barely lost out on playoffs, also with a 2 and 5 record, and Black Cat would round out the field with an 0 and 7 finish. And changing over to some community tournament news now, we're revisiting a story we covered a couple weeks ago by taking another look at Aramori's Game Changers Cup. This tournament, run by Ignite AMER Stage 1 champ and Sentinels content creator Aramori, was built from the ground up to help bring the spotlight to women and players of marginalized gender looking to dip their toes into the tournament environment and take their game to the next level. Over the past month, 24 Rivals content creators and players have been participating in weekly events, including tournaments and coaching sessions, all with the goal of improving their skills and spending some time in the spotlight. A celebrity guest from each role was brought in to teach players how to get the most out of their gameplay, including Rymazing for the duelists, Crimzo for the vanguards, and Aramori herself for the strategists. And those sessions are actually posted over on Aramori's YouTube channel, so you can check them out for yourselves. But all this hard work over the past month has been leading up to this. The first 3 weekly tournaments as part of this event held $1,200 prize pools, but the finals had the biggest, plus an extra $400 for the tournament MVP. The players were assigned teams based on their performance in the first 3 tourneys, trying to create as well-balanced teams as possible to even out the odds of winning. And they'd of course have to harness everything they learned during the coaching sessions as well, as the 4 teams would make their way through a double elimination bracket in hopes of taking home the lion's share of the prize. And it'd all be casted by Ignite casters Cozy and Lemon Kiwi, giving every single game a big match feel. Not to mention it was sponsored by both Marvel Rivals and SanDisk, with SanDisk bumping up the prize pool to a whopping $16,000 in total. And so teams Loki, Invis, Psy, and Frost would step onto the battlefield to duke it out, powered up after a month of boot camping and practicing. And though every team would put on a valiant performance, only 2 would make it through the bracket to the very end. Team Psy were the first to qualify into the grand finals, and they blazed a path of destruction all through the upper bracket. They'd defeat Team Loki and Team Invis without dropping a single map, poising themselves as the team to beat in this last bout. Psy may have defeated Team Invis, but Invis were hellbound on getting to those grand finals. They'd go on a tear against Team Frost, taking it a close 2-1 shave before locking in their spot for one last bout against Team Psy. Celestial Husk was on deck for map number 1 in this final matchup, and there'd be some solid back and forth between both teams. Team Psy would snag point 1, and Team Invis would push them to their limits on point 2, but Psy would take the first map win off the back of a scramble of a team fight at the end of the map. Hala Jajalia was up next in this best of 5, with Team Invis on the attack first. They'd clear the map, leaving Team Psy in an uphill battle they just weren't able to overcome, and the series would be all tied up. Museum of Contemplation was up next, with Invis taking the first attack yet again. But Team Psy would rally this time, holding them short at checkpoint 2, and they'd swoop in to steal the map and park themselves on match point. We were off to Burn into T'Challa next, where Team Invis would battle to keep the dream alive. And battle they would, making it an all-out tug of war against Team Psy on points 1 and 2. But the Phenoms on Team Psy would manage to flip both of them their way, closing out the final map of the tournament with a solid 3-1 win overall. And so Team Psy would be the ones to emerge victorious in the final phase of the AGCC, stuffed to the gills with talented names like Maluki, Lena, and Olive. But of course, none of this would be possible without the efforts and passion of Aramori herself, who the competitors compiled numerous thank you messages for at the end of the tournament. And though this tournament draws to a close, it's truly just the beginning of a bigger movement in the Rivals community, and one sorely needed. It takes a great deal of courage to enter a tournament in the first place, and these players not only exhibited that fearlessness, but they put on an entertaining show and were all part of what's sure to be a growing initiative as time goes on. And we've got one more community tournament story for you this week as our coverage continues of INGAGE's Marvel Rivals Grassroots series. In case you missed our coverage last week, MRGR is a multi-week league-style tournament bringing together 4 talented teams from the EMEA region that have rising stocks and are looking to up their game and get to the next level of competition. This is actually the second season of the MRGR, the first being home to the team that would eventually become Pulsar Esports, formerly known as Dawn Core. This second week of competition saw things heating up even more, so let's see what you missed. It was Menace and Apollo squaring off in the first match of this week's broadcast, and it'd be quite the brawl to kick things off. They'd end up locked in a double 99 overtime on both the first and second capture points of Celestial Husk, but both would end up going Apollo's way, giving them the first map win and an opening blitz. Menace would grit their teeth and battle back on Museum of Contemplation, delivering the 1-2 punch of a map clear followed by a full hold to even out the series. Symbiotic Surface was the last stop for this series, with Apollo on the attack first. They'd fight tooth and nail, but would fall just short of clearing the map, leaving the door to victory open for Menace. But Symbiotic Surface ended up being their domain, finishing the fight with over 4 minutes on the clock as they'd complete the reverse sweep against Apollo 2-1. Planet Sainage and Chicken Jockey were back onto the battlefield for the second series of the day. Both of these rosters are stacked, so it was no surprise to see them go all the way on the very first map of Hell's Heaven. Chicken Jockey would find an early lead on the last point and run it all the way to the end, taking map 1 in solid fashion. We were off to the mean streets of New York with Midtown for map 2, and Chicken Jockey would go on the attack first. They'd build up a fair time bank, but Sainage went ruthless on defense and were able to stop Chicken Jockey short of checkpoint 3. However, Chicken Jockey would also put up some serious defenses, cutting off Planet Sainage before they could even secure checkpoint 1, meaning this series went the way of Chicken Jockey 2-0. The 2 losers of those previous matches will be back at the plate next, with Apollo taking on Planet Sainage. And it was back to Celestial Husk yet again, where Planet Sainage would go aggro. It wouldn't go completely uncontested, but knowing they needed to get a win on the board this week, they'd push through and take the map for themselves. We'd stop by Spider Islands for map 2 of this series, with Sainage taking the offense first this time. They'd cleave a path of destruction through that first round, making it to the end of the line and clearing the map with nearly 2 minutes still on the clock. Try as they might, but Apollo weren't able to pick themselves up, and Sainage would go over in this series with a clean 2-0. And the winners of our earlier matches would go head-to-head in one last showdown for this week, Chicken Jockey versus Menace. Menace would take an early lead on Hell's Heaven, but Chicken Jockey would clutch up on both points, battling from behind a few times to take map 1. And it was off to Museum of Contemplation for the second map of the series, with Menace behind the wheel of the Batsmobile first. They'd get stuck in overtime before the first checkpoint, but would power through to keep it rolling. And they would finally grind to a halt about halfway to checkpoint 2, leaving it open for Chicken Jockey to try and close out the series. And though it would be a struggle, they too were able to clutch up in overtime, closing out the map with just 60 seconds on the clock, taking the series in another 2-0 sweep. And after the second week of competition, Chicken Jockey and Planet Sainage would actually find themselves tied for first, both going 3-1 in total thus far. EMP Apollo staked their claim in the middle of the pack at 1-3, with Menace currently bringing up the rear at 1-3 as well, with just a slightly worse map differential. But there's still time to dust themselves off and get back in the fight, with another week of competition left. Check out INGAGE's Twitch channel for more MRGR and even more Marvel Rivals events in the future. Link, as always, is in the description. Well, that's all for this week's Rivals Report. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on the latest in Marvel Rivals Esports. And you can get even more Rivals Esports content by following me on X and TikTok. And if your gaming chair is in need of an upgrade, my friends at Autofull have you covered. Autofull is a leading esports brand specializing in professional gaming equipment, including chairs, desks, and immersive setups. Committed to the spirit of striving to win while young, Autofull combines ergonomic design, advanced technology, and esports-grade performance. Having supported nearly 2,000 tournaments and hundreds of pro teams worldwide, Autofull continues to deliver high-quality gaming experiences under its philosophy, be your own hero. For more information about the flagship product M6 Ultra 2.0 with heating, cooling, and massage, visit Autofull.com. I've been Diatonic, you've been amazing, and I'll see you in-game.